Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Natasha Behnam, who plays journalist, activist, and influencer Lola Rahaii on the excellent Max series, The Girls on the Bus. Natasha, I love the show, as you were just saying. Lola's, I always want to start here. Like, Lola's the only, I guess, main character on the show who doesn't work for a legacy media outlet at the start here. And having played this kind of budding journalist, and I guess, how did your perspective on the field itself change, having had this experience as an actor and stuff?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here. And I'm so glad that you love the show. It changed my perspective in like the biggest way because I didn't know, I think most people don't know anything about the world of journalism unless you're in it. You don't know how long the hours are, that you're on the road for months at a time, like the effect it can have on your family. It takes so much dedication to do what journalists do, to do what you do. And I just have such a big respect for the field. And it was a really amazing learning lesson into all of that, especially having Amy Chozick, who, is one of the greatest to do it. And she was sort of our source of information for the authenticity of the field and how everything would go down. So we had the best teacher.
With Amy, is what you like you're saying. I mean, obviously, like her, I guess her analog would be the Melissa character. But for you, I guess, how did like she like help with Lola, and like how did you guys talk about the character?
Well, it was helpful to understand the world in general for me as an actor. Obviously, we're making a show about this world, so I just kind of have to know what's going on. But you're right to say that because Lola is coming in not knowing anything about journalism. So in that way, it was easier for me because I didn't have to understand all of the history and the depth that, for example, Melissa's character has on lock. But Lola's coming into it completely fresh, completely new. So for me, and the conversations that I had with Amy and Rena about the character were more about who she is and her backstory and what got her to this point. And, she's a survivor of a mass shooting, and that was a really important detail of her character to ground her, which Amy and Rena and I had a lot of conversations about that is the truth of this character, is that she's just a traumatized kid who is desperately trying to find her place in the world.
So glad you mentioned that, because that was one of my other questions. Obviously, that's like a big factor. The backstory of that trauma is explored in the seventh episode, which is airing, I think, now as we're speaking. So people, if you're watching this, can see that. But when you mentioned like the trauma, and I think one of the things I love about your performance is obviously that's like baked into Lola, right? Like she's experiences mass trauma, mass shooting, and this massive trauma, but that's present in your performance, but it doesn't overwhelm the performance. And I guess, how did you kind of like find that balance and nuance in terms of like clearly, like it when like people go through life having experienced trauma, and they're also able to have joy and all these different emotions and like feelings, right? Like, so I guess, how did you kind of like balance that in the performance? Because I think you do a great job of like, it feels like it's always there, but it's not overwhelming what she's trying to do.
That is really sweet. Thank you for saying that. Um, I don't really know, to be honest. I think in a way, I sort of looked at it. I look at all my characters this way, and I sort of had to with Lola in just a very human way. Okay, what we've all experienced trauma. Every human being, we've all had, whatever it is, maybe not to the degree that Lola has experienced, I pray, hopefully not, but and we continue to live our lives, right? I mean, we can look at the world right now. It's burning down, you could argue. And we are sitting here having this conversation. So the truth of our reality is that multiple things can exist at once, and it's actually natural to hold everything at the same time. And it wasn't fun to live in a space of trauma, like as I was doing my research for Lola, and on the page, she can feel so angry because of all the things she's covering, but that was not joyful for me to experience as an actor. I didn't want to sit in that. And I was like, well, even in my life, I don't sit in the horrible things all the time. So it was just a sort of, I guess, natural and human choice to be like, well, she also wants to change the world. It is important for this character to persist and move forward. I think her optimism is strategic and necessary. It's a choice she's making. And that sort of balanced out for me her past.
You have like a great scene in the seventh episode with Carla Gugino, who plays I'm sorry, blanking
Grace.
on she's in the episode with you, Grace, obviously, duh. And you have this, that scene is really great, and we learn about like what happened with Lola and the mass shooting and stuff. And I guess like I found that great too because the Grace and Lola have been at such odds a lot of times throughout the show. So you have this great moment with Carla. I guess like how did you kind of like guys discuss that sequence and like working together to make that scene feel as authentic as it does, and especially at that moment for both those characters feel so significant. And I guess like how did you kind of talk about that?
Carla is so generous. She's such a present, generous actor. I was honored that I got to do that scene, which is sort of Lola's big catharsis with her. She just held the space in a very safe way. She was just right there with me. And we had Demaine Davis directing the episode, who's such an incredible director, and she was so compassionate. And we actually had some conversations. She was like, I think I went to her and I was like, listen, I have this like big catharsis scene and sometimes I freak out and I just want to make sure I do it good. And she was like, you're fine, whatever you need is okay. And of course, we had Tawal, our writer who wrote this episode, gave me such a beautiful monologue. So really what I'm trying to say is there was a lot of people involved in that moment so that it sort of felt like all I had to do was show up and tell the truth as best as I could at risk of sounding cheesy. Um, but that is sort of how I felt. I was like, this is a real experience that too many Americans have had. The only thing I can do is just show up, read these beautiful lines in the space that was held by a domain, and Carla, who was right across from me, like just locked in, um, helping me ground, honestly, and just, be truthful.
I love this episode. I think this is all in the same episode where obviously Lola in the seventh episode confronts there's like the more liberal candidate who's like an AOC stand-in, right? Basically, or like, like that kind of thing. And you mentioned before how she's like got this like fresh perspective on journalism. And I found that part really great because she is like I think Grace says this, like she's holding her accountable for like flip-flopping on her views, but in
Yeah.
like she has such care for the views, right? And I found it a really interesting commentary, especially like we see now where it's like how journalism is like, do you take like the both sides journalism or whatever it is, right? And like Lola clearly has a POV, but she is also doing good journalism in that sequence, right? By like calling out like this hypocrisy and I found that really fascinating. And I guess, yeah, like I just love that part of it. I guess, how did you kind of like feel about that and getting to show that there are other, like not every journal, not there are different ways to do journalism, I guess. And I think that's one of the things I love about how Lola is presented on this show.
Yeah, I think Lola's whole thing is that she's just trying to be authentic. And she, has had experiences with the past in media after what happened to her, where it felt inauthentic and it felt like she couldn't tell her story. So her whole thing is just, I really want to tell the truth and for and by people who maybe aren't paid attention to historically in the way they should be. And I think that moment where her candidate crush is flip-flopping is crushing for her. It's such a letdown. It's such a disappointment. And I also think it's obviously the straw that breaks the camel's back. She's already geared up at a 10 emotionally. And I was talking to another journalist and I sort of uncovered this. Maybe Lola knew all along deep down that this candidate's not perfect because no candidates are perfect. But to see her flip in such a drastic way, I agree with you. I think it's great commentary that none of these politicians are good. We've never met a good politician. There's no such thing. And I think Lola's not afraid, as heartbreaking as it is, to call that out immediately and say, you are a liar. You're a liar.
Mhm.
Because she's trying to tell the truth, even though it is devastating.
Right. I love the other thing I like about the show, and is that I think in a different show, maybe it would be easy to imagine this as characters like a punchline if it's like written by like a boomer writer or like a Gen X writer like me, like, oh, we're gonna take all our anger out on like the younger generation and make this character either
Totally.
silly or like kind of foolish. And then on the flip side, I think if it was written like completely from like a Gen Z perspective or whatever, it would maybe be incredibly virtuous. But I love how Lola is able to be right in scenes and also wrong in scenes. And I guess I just love that whole balance and how much like yeah, how important was that for you guys? I mean, as a show in general, but certainly for you to like get to show that, to have this kind of like full-bodied character, and all of these characters on the show like I feel like are very, it's it's not like cliched all the, like, you know what I mean, it is feels like much more authentic, like we're saying.
I do. And again, thank you for saying that. I'm so happy to hear that. It was so important. It was everything. We were having those conversations every single day. And I feel so lucky, so blessed that we had Rena and Amy as our showrunners and all of our execs were so understanding. I don't know if all shows or movies are like that, but they were really, really open to hearing what we had to say. And Amy was so awesome with the Gen Z stuff. Like there was a couple, it was like very few times I would read a script and I'd be like, Amy, I love you. I can't say that. No one's ever said that. Like there just a couple places here and there, but she would always be like, no problem, change it to whatever you would say in a moment like that. So there was a lot of collaboration and thank God we get to be everything at once,
Mhm.
right? Again, that was the I think that's the core and the spine of the show and the core and the spine of good art is do I hate this person or do I love this person? Or maybe I just relate to this person because they're bad and good and confused and right and wrong. It's just human, which
You
is
get
beautiful.
another great, I mean, another part of this I love, and it kind of goes with that too, is I think it's in the sixth episode when you're all on the bus when it breaks down, right? And that's also a really fun episode for you and Lola when she's up on the roof trying to get the signal and in the middle of getting canceled, perhaps online. And it's just it's very it's very for no matter what age, I feel like that was very authentic again because it's so stressful. It's like they reminded me of like that person on the remember there was like a long time ago, it's like that person on the plane who tweeted something and then got canceled on the flight or whatever it was. I forget what it
Sure,
was
sure, sure.
very so like I totally understand all that. But in that episode, there's all these great conversations that are happening between the four of you. And I found the one about gender incredibly like noteworthy because nobody is really demonized in that conversation. It's like very thorny subject matter, and everyone is like kind of expressing their own views in a way that I feel like was really well done. I don't know. I just found that like incredibly fascinating again to see that on TV presented in that way where you're not getting like there's a very didactic maybe or whatever. And I guess can you talk about like yeah, getting to do those kind of sequences like that and getting to like express these very complicated views in a way that allows like a nuanced conversation. I think actually furthers maybe the real life could further real life conversation, right? For people, I think when they're watching it.
Yeah, I think that was the goal that Amy and Rena and all of the writers had was to have a nuanced conversation where you didn't know who was right or who was wrong. And it was a blessing to be able to do that. I think you have these four women from different generations and they all have different viewpoints. And it's also our job as actors to believe our characters' viewpoints. And so, from that perspective, everybody's going to come to the table with, well, what I'm saying, I believe to be 100% true, and I have reasons to back it up, and I've justified it. So that when you can see, and of course, the writers have to do the same thing. So, when you see the final product, you get a really good conversation and you've gotten to know these characters and you understand why they're saying what they're saying. And exactly like you said, it can kind of be like, oh, no one's really wrong. They're making a good point.
Mhm.
And if, audiences are open enough to hearing something that maybe they don't believe in, I agree. And I hope that it can really start those conversations.
And then you also get like the other thing too is that I think by that point certainly and just in general the four of you are such great or the characters are like really have bonded even if they're like at odds and like we said like Grace maybe is on the polar opposite of Lola but you're still able to have this great moment together like in the next episode when you're talking about Lola's trauma I guess like as how was it like was that bond between you four as actors like was that immediate or like did you have to like was that kind of developed over time like we see in the show as well.
Both. I think we got really lucky. And if anyone's heard us talk about the show at this point, I feel like you've already heard this, but we got so lucky that we just fell in love with each other. And there was an immediate, I think, kindness and camaraderie because nobody is evil or a bad person. So we got along really well. And then and then our friendships really grew as well. I love those girls. They're my family, they're my sisters. I mean, it just I'm glad that shows on screen because we were having the time of our lives together.
It's a very like I said, it's a very entertaining show. I was just like I love it so much. I know we can't really like so there's I think 3 episodes remaining in the season. I know we don't want to get into like detailed spoilers about what comes up, but I think there's a really great stuff coming up for Lola and the character. And I guess like for you, yeah, how did you feel like landing the plane here in the first season on Lola's arc and like what's to come?
That's such a fun question and I won't give away any spoilers, but
No.
I definitely had, I'll just say, lots of opinions with where she sort of ends up. Um, I think after months on the road, she's grown so much and she wants different things. And we've seen her kind of evolve into maybe something closer to what she is. And I find where she ends very precarious for a lot of reasons because of who we've met over the season. And I'm if we hopefully get a season two, I'm really fascinated to see, I'll just say, how that goes for her.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question. Is like, I'm just like season two. I would love, I personally would love a season two, and I'm assuming like there's nothing really to say, but that seems like where you would want to go is like explore what happens and maybe the finale further in season two. I'd imagine would be a goal for you and getting the whole band back together as well.
Yeah, of course. I hope so. That would be a dream come true.
So you can watch Girls on the Bus, new episodes on Max every Thursday. Seventh episode is available right now, and more to come. Natasha Behnam, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.